Thank you very much for coming tonight for this lecture. What's that? Thank you very much for coming tonight to this lecture, and it's a pleasure to have you here. And thank you very much for the organizers for this opportunity they gave me to come to the museum, to come to Madrid. So today I was in Villarreal to give my first ever lecture in Spain. So already today we have my second lecture in Spain. As you maybe know, maybe you read about the fact that these lectures are part of a tour. So it's now several years I'm doing a world tour, taking on tour the great white sharks. So we talk about great white sharks of South Africa, sometimes about great white sharks of Australia, sometimes even about great white sharks of Mediterranean. So we know that the great white sharks are present even in the Mediterranean Sea, but 1 century ago, the great white shark was very common in Mediterranean. Areas like Balearic Islands, Sicilian waters, Tunisia, Croatia, the Northern Tyrrhenian Sea, these areas were very important for the presence of the great white shark. Great white shark is still present in Mediterranean, but the fact is over the last 60, 70 years, they have been very, very rare because we kill almost all of them. You know, there are not many left. So now, seeing a single great white in Mediterranean has become very, very rare, very, very difficult. At every time the media will tell us, great white shark in Mediterranean, maybe entered from the Gibraltar Strait. It's not true. They reproduce in Mediterranean. The very first case of great white shark described in the Mediterranean was Linnaeus that did it, was a Mediterranean specimen. So you know that the great white sharks always lived in our waters too. It's not something strange. It's not something to be afraid of. It's a normal part of the environment. An healthy environment needs absolutely great white shark. They are a very important part of the ecosystem. So this is the reason why now to see the great white sharks we need to travel. We need to go in different countries, in different continents too. Because we need places where the great white is still more abundant, like South Africa, like South Australia, like California, or Mexico, Guadalupe Island, like New England waters or Japan. Clearly, to observe these animals, we must go in places where there are already specialists studying them and people doing this kind of job, taking out people, common people, researchers, photographers on their boat so they can see the great white shark. So, for example, we don't go to Japan because there is no operator working there. We don't go even to California because there is an operator working there, but the water is just too turbid. You don't see anything. And we don't go, for example, anymore to New Zealand because the government decided to close the activity of cage diving because there are still people thinking that it's not good, it's dangerous for the animals and for the people, most important for them. We'll see today why this is terribly wrong. They made a huge mistake. We'll see why today. So, when we talk about great white sharks, clearly people are interested, even because the big interest from humans for great whites started in the 1975 with the movie Jaws by Steven Spielberg. The producers wanted Alfred Hitchcock to make the movie, but Hitchcock was talking all the time about making a movie on a whale, like Moby Dick. So the producers get fed up and then contacted another filmmaker, the very young at the time Spielberg. The problem is that when Jaws came out, it was the most seen movie ever. So from Spain to Italy, to USA, to New Zealand, Australia, everywhere, people started to be very afraid of great white sharks. People that before knew nothing about these animals. But the movie was just a movie. The problem is that they are still producing this kind of movie because it sells, you know? The fear sells. So the media, the shark, tiburon, and then killer, you know? Always this association. Once, the great white shark was even called, for example, in Australia, man-eater. So just think that it's very, very rare that a great white shark will eat a person. In the world, in 1 year, we have approximately 70 to 130 cases of shark attacks on humans. That's very small number when compared to any other way people can die or be killed by some wild animals, like, for example, snakes. The fact is that we think that it is more terrible because shark will eat the person. But that's not true. Because of these people that get attacked by sharks in the world, only approximately 10 will die. Only 10 people in the whole world killed by any species of sharks, and we have more than 500 species, approximately 530 species in the world. So this gives you a sense of scale. How difficult it is to get attacked by a shark, and how difficult it is to get killed by a shark. And when we look at these 10 cases of people dying because of shark attacks, not only great white, any species of shark, we'll see that actually the persons that will be eaten by the shark are just a small percentage of this. Sometimes a tiger shark can eat a person. Sometimes a bull shark can eat a person. Sometimes a great white can eat a person, but this is very, very, very rare. We'll see later why sometimes they may attack people. So that's the introduction. Anyway, killer shark, we say. And in the meantime, every single year, we kill from 70 to 100 million of sharks in the world. And I'm sorry to say it, probably you already know, Spain is at the very top of this list as a nation, as a shark-killing nation. You know, China is the worst, but I'm sad to say that Spain comes immediately after. Most of them is by catch, so shark killed by mistake. But you know what's happened in Vigo, in Spain. The amount, if you look on YouTube, you look the amount of sharks that are landed every single day. It's horrible, it's sickening. So clearly there will be even sometimes some great white sharks, not many, because I already said we got rid of most of them already. Italy is not close to the top of the list anymore because we already destroyed most of the sharks in the Mediterranean. So, but you know, Spain also fish a lot on the Atlantic side. But Italy is still one of the biggest importers. Spain, Italy, China are also very big importers of shark meat. So, that's the reason why it's very difficult, the idea of organizing an expedition to see great white sharks in the Mediterranean. There are not enough nowadays. We must go, for example, to South Africa. So 10 years ago, I started to do expeditions in South Africa. My idea as a shark specialist, as a shark researcher, was to give courses in shark biology. And at that time, I didn't find interest from universities in Europe. So I said, I can do that. I can do an expedition where I can take people to see the great white sharks and I can give them a course in shark biology. But, you know, I was thinking like, I'll do it only once because I'm not really interested diving, cage diving, all this stuff. But I worked with the right people, so after the first time, I understood that was a very important part in my future life. After doing my first expeditions in South Africa, for several reasons, I chose to work first in South Africa. One of the reasons is just because the flights are much cheaper. It makes sense, because when you do these kind of things, the cost is very important. For example, I'd love to do an expedition in Japan, but you can imagine there is no operator working there, just renting a boat, finding the right crew, having a cage built for this will be incredibly expensive. I've never been good in finding sponsors. So, sponsors, research, observation of wild animals. No, thank you, you know. It's very difficult. So, after a few years, I decided to do this kind of expeditions with courses in shark biology, even in Australia. Because Australia has always been my biggest dream. When I was, so that's, you see, the whole Australia, and this state specifically is called South Australia. And it's here that we go to see the great white sharks. It's the best place in Australia to see the great white sharks. And it's the only place where they operate to take researchers, common people, professional divers, and filmmakers to film and to see the great white sharks. That's the only place. And specifically, you see that there is what we call the Spencer Gulf. That's the Spencer Gulf. So you have Adelaide here, and you have the Neptune Islands that are located here, so at the mouth of the Spencer Gulf. This is not my dad, but that's a shark legend, one of the very few persons that deserve the state of shark legend. Not just because he has a Facebook page, you know. Nowadays, everyone can become like a legend just because he has a website and a Facebook page. This man is the one that invented the cage diving with great white sharks. This man is the person that also worked for the Jaws, the good one, the very first one, and filmed the underwater footages together with Ron and Valerie Taylor, other two Australian specialists. And is one of the biggest shark experts. He started a big program of data collection, so he built a database that has no equal in the world. Now it's more than 20 years that are collecting data regularly. And Rodney Fox has become famous many years ago because when he was very young, he was a spearfisher diver. What happened is that during a competition, spearfishing competition, he got attacked by a 3-meter great white shark. And the great white shark was bitten this part of the body, and this picture with Rodney Fox and the wound and then the stitches is all over the books on sharks and the articles and the documentaries. He survived a very bad attack by a great white shark. So what happened is that from that moment, he wanted to kill them. You have to think that at that time, people used to think that the only good shark is the dead one. And that was the setting of mind. You must also consider that once humans were half as abundant as nowadays, and also the sharks were very, very, very much more abundant. Just think that in the last 50 years, many species of sharks, let's say the majority of sharks of big size or medium size, have decreased heavily. We have many species that have decreased of over 90%. 90. At the time, there was still plenty of sharks. So many people thought it's a good idea to kill some of them because they are very dangerous. You know, they were thinking like that. So after he was a spearfishing diver, so he used to kill fish underwater, when he went attacked and then survived, he started to kill the sharks. But this period of his life was very short, because once he was observing a great white shark killed, and then suddenly he told me, he realized, we don't have the right to do that. That's an extremely beautiful animal, extremely intelligent animal. Why we must do that? So it was very modern thought at the time. He was the very first in Australia that started to talk about the shark conservation. And people did not understand at the time, but was working all the time and giving lectures and making documentaries, a lot of documentaries, and working with a big name in shark research. On his boat, some of the most important studies have been made. Some of the most important documentaries have been filmed, even the first ones by National Geographic, when National Geographic was still at the top of the game. So what happened is that with the passing of time, clearly I learned a lot. I spent a lot of time underwater with these animals and on the boat looking at these animals. And the work at the beginning at the dangerous reef. But then what happened is that clearly was getting older and the sharks were moving. So they became more abundant in another area. It is close to dangerous reef, but that's the Neptune Islands. So they started to work at the Neptune Islands. And this is what they're still doing. Not more at dangerous reef, but at the Neptune Islands. This one is the son of Rodney, is Andrew Fox. Now Rodney is old, and Andrew Fox is the chief of operation, so he's managing everything. He's a very good guy, very nice person, and extremely sensitive when it comes about the way you work with the wild animals. And that's very important to me. There are two things that always make me choose to work with pioneers. The pioneers have the longest experience of any other person working in the field. And also, two important things. The first is that having more experience, they know how to work so that people are not put in danger. So it's safer to work with them. And the other thing is that they really care about the animals and they know how to work without harming the animals, without changing their behavior. So that's very good. Also, I like it because I learn a lot from them. So Andrew Fox is the person in the world that has spent more time underwater with the great white sharks than anyone else, because started very young with his dad. So for observing the great white sharks in South Australia, we leave from the harbour of Port Lincoln. That is a 40 minutes flight from Adelaide. And usually we leave from the harbour in the early morning, and we want to have maximum time at disposal. So usually the expeditions that we run there last 4 or 5 days. That's the boat they used till the beginning of this year. It was the Princess 2. They are just changing the boat now. They just changed the boat now, and probably they are going to build a new one, because new rules, you know, and also the boat, some parts getting older. They'd like to have a boat completely built on purpose to dive with the sharks. So this is going to change. And that's the skipper. You need a very good skipper to work in this condition of the sea that sometimes are very, very bad. Last time we had waves of 5 meters. Sometimes you can have bigger waves like 7 or 12 meters. Clearly, when you have a wave of 12 meters, you don't go to the Neptune Islands. You stay in the harbour. But, you know, things may happen sometimes. And these are the Neptune Islands. Nobody lives there. They can do sometimes research, but let's say it's not, there is not a proper community anymore. There are two groups of Neptune Islands, North and South Neptunes. Oops. And the Neptune Islands are, luckily, protected areas. So all the birds, all the fish there all the sharks are protected. You cannot go there and kill them. Just think that recently, the first time I went to have my first expedition in South Australia, Andrew asked me, please, give as many interviews as possible to the local media. Why? Because the government, someone in the government is trying to change the rules and to open the Neptune to fishing. What? You know, that's incredible, you know. And for me it was funny and weird that as a foreigner I had to give an interview when you have there Andrew Rodney Fox that are top specialists, you know. But that's how the crazy world works. The cage. The cage, you may have a different type of cage. I work with operators that have proper cages. So the problem is that like in every job, in your job too, so even in my job, there are people that work well, and people that work so-so, and people that work very bad. So clearly the cages are not something that you have a brand that produce for all the operators, but you just go to someone, please build a cage like that, and you tell them. So it's up to you if you want to build a very stupid cage where the shark can get inside, or a solid cage that will be safe to use. And I must say that the cages used by Andrew Fox are the safest in the business. Clearly, if you stick your feet or your hands out of the cage, it's up to you, but that's a very bad idea, you know. So you can have the safest cage ever, but if you do stupid things, then of course it's always dangerous. And what happened is that to see the sharks, we use the cage, but the first thing we do is going to the spot with the boat. And it takes usually like 4 hours to travel from Port Lincoln to the Neptune Islands. So most of the time what we used to do is just traveling there, staying there for 4 or 5 days. The amount of time that is required to see the shark and to see them in the proper way. Sometimes the sea is almost flat, many times it's bumpy, and sometimes it's very bad. Okay, so seasickness tablets are very useful. Great white shark, this image of the dorsal fin of the great white shark at the surface is not going to happen all the time. Usually, great white sharks don't swim with the dorsal fin out of the surface. It's just a dramatic effect in the movies, you know. But if you use a bait or something at the surface, you may attract them to the surface, and then you can see them swimming with the dorsal fin out of the water. But usually they don't do that during their normal life, you know, without this type of interactions. There are other species like the blue shark and also the mako shark. This tiburon azul, marayo, okay. These species used to swim a lot with the dorsal fin out of the water, you know. But the great white shark is not one of them. You do it, can do it, but not often. And they are very impressive, they look frightening, you know. But we like them even for this reason, because they look so splendid and ferocious, but they are actually, I always compare the great white sharks to dogs, because they behave in a very similar way as dogs. Most of the time they come to the boat just because they want to play, you know. I'm sorry that somebody that still very attached to the image of Jaws will be disappointed by this, but that's the truth. No animal is a monster. Animals just want to live their normal life like we do. There is no man-eater. There are shark eaters. We are shark eaters. Remember, from 70 to 100 millions per year. If there is a monster, that's the human, because it's the only species that is destroying the whole animal kingdom and the only world that we have. So that's the cage. It's a big one, and of course also by the angle of the photo look bigger. That's a more correct proportion. So it's 4 main cage. for people in the cage at the time. That's good, because people have space, can use big cameras, or even small GoPro, clearly, now very much used. And you know, it's good, because you use regulators. It's not like in South Africa, where you just hold your breath. So in South Africa, head out of the water, shark is coming, go down, go down. It's very quick, you know. Beautiful, but very quick. Everybody can do that, easy. But in Australia, it's better, because you put your regulator in the mouth, the tanks are on the boat, so you don't need a scuba certification to do this. You don't need a dive certification. Anyone can do it, and it's very, very simple, very easy. And you can relax underwater in the blue and just waiting for the shark like that. So you see there is even the main window, and there is a lower window. So you can go down on your knees, and the people behind you can still see in front. And clearly you can see on the sides too, and even behind. So for example, you can see this one coming. The water is blue. It's not like in South Africa, where the water most of the time is green. Sometimes it's brown, and very rarely it's blue, because it's like that. In Australia, the water usually is blue. Sometimes may be more intense, sometimes it's more greenish blue, but it's beautiful. At the surface, on average, you have 15, 20 meters visibility. On some days, you can have even 25 or 30, but that's rare. Let's say that 15, 20, that's the normal situation. So usually you see the bottom. And we'll see that we go even on the bottom, and we'll explain why and how. But on the bottom, clearly the visibility usually is a little bit less. So maybe from 7 meters to 15 meters. But the last time we had at least 20 meters, you know. So that's the most typical situation. I'm sorry that on the screen, the colors are much better than on the big screen. But, you know, sometimes it's like that, you know. So just imagine that all these pictures are more blue, you know, because that's the case. And the shark will arrive and will come to the cage many times, but he has no interest of eating the people in the cage. Most of the time, just don't care, just come for a look. He's much more interested in the bait, and this is why we use a bait, because the people in the cage are not useful for attracting a shark. We had some accident in Guadalupe, other operators, not us. And there have been also accidents in South Africa, several accidents, not to us. None of the operator for which I work has ever had any accident, because we work in a very safe way and the cage is properly built. But the fact is that you have a few operators working the wrong way, sometimes even for big television chains, sometimes even with researchers, but sometimes they work anyway very, very bad. With the cages, with the window too big, or pushing the shark to go too close to the cage, or to bump the cage, to rend the cage. That's very dangerous for the people and for the shark. So it's no surprise. For example, in Guadalupe there have been a couple of very bad accidents. Maybe you saw that on a few years ago on YouTube, very close to each other, with a shark actually entering the cage. No harm to the divers, luckily, but in both cases the shark were badly harmed. So that's never good, you know? You must be careful what you do. These are very big animals. So a great white shark, on average, measure 3.5 meters. That's the average size of the great white shark, 3.5 meters. And the 3.5 meter animal is a big one, even because the great white shark has a big diameter. It's not slim like a blue shark, for example, or a mako. So it's massive. So usually a great white is about 600, 800 kilos. It can get much heavier, much more heavier. So 3.5 is the average size, but they can grow up to 6.6 meters. And that's the maximum size I recorded years ago during a study that took over 20 years of my activity about the presence of great white sharks in the Mediterranean. And I recorded the 6 biggest ones in Sicily, Malta, and France. All the 3 of them 6.6 meters. That's the maximum recorded size. We have not 1, but 3 cases. So we know they can attain this size. All the other things that you can hear about the 7 meters great white, 8 meters, 9 meters, sorry, it's bullshit. It's never been proved, you know? Maybe, but it's never been proved. A shark doesn't need to be bigger, you know, to be impressive and to be beautiful. It's not a dinosaur. It's not a T-Rex. It's not a Elasmosaurus. It's not even a whale, you know. If you want something bigger, there are the whales, like the sperm whale or the blue whale, up to 33 meters. So, you know, that on average, we see 3.5 meters great whites. That's average size. But during my expeditions, we succeeded to see bigger ones. But let's say that in general, great white sharks bigger than 4.5 meters are very, very rare. If you see a 4-meter great white, you are already lucky. 4.2, 4.3, that's a big great white shark that you can see. You are lucky to see. But what's happened is that working in some area, where the great white sharks sometimes get bigger, for example in False Bay, where we work in South Africa, that's the place where the bigger great white sharks are found. So the average size of great white sharks in False Bay, in South Africa, is bigger than the great white sharks in other areas in South Africa, like Gans Bay and Mossel Bay. Depending by the area and the period, you may find larger great white sharks than the average size. So, always the stick, eh? So the stick sometimes will attract the shark. Sometimes the shark will try to swallow your GoPro. We'll say why later. The color of the water is very beautiful to me because also when I was a kid, I was about 8 years old, I saw my very first documentary with great white sharks. Now you have documentaries on sharks all the time. It's boring, beautiful images, and the contents, the quality of the contents is decreasing all the time. So it doesn't make any sense. I don't want to watch documentaries on sharks anymore. Sometimes I try, but most of them are really disappointing. Of course, it's not the rule. There will be some good one in the middle. But let's say that the quality of images has improved a lot, but the quality of the contents has decreased a lot, actually. So when I saw my very first great white shark documentary that was filmed with Rodney Fox, and now it's so weird to think that I work for him. We had also other 2 very important specialists. I already mentioned them, Ron and Valerie Taylor. And this was filmed at Dangerous Reef. And it was by an Italian filmmaker, it was Bruno Velati. And it was about the great white sharks and other species of sharks and the fact that they are sometimes attacking people. And you have to think that this documentary was filmed in 1976. So it was immediately released after Jaws. So there was a lot about the danger that the great white sharks were supposed to be for humans, but it was beautiful because in the end footage you have a great white shark that came too close to the cage and became entangled in the rope. The cage were very artisanal at the time. The shark is becoming entangled in the rope that tie the cage to the boat. So what happened is that you see the shark is struggling, and you see the shark is dying, because if they cannot move properly, there is not enough oxygen reaching the gills, so they will die. What happened is that in this situation, the divers went into the water and saved the shark. So the message, the final message of the documentary was very good, because he say, we have no right to kill these animals, they are beautiful, even if sometimes they attack people. So it was very modern message. It is beautiful that was filmed in this area of the Spencer Gulf, you know. And this color is the same I used to see also in the first images, the first photographies of great white sharks. Sometimes we see the great white when it's swimming, it looks like it's almost flying, you know, because of this shape of the body, highly hydrodynamic, this shape and size and position, the pectoral fins that looks like wings. It's very beautiful, it's gracious. One of the most beautiful things is when you see them swimming, they're so full of grace, they're just beautiful. And you can see that sometimes they come very close to the cage. So that was approximately 4.5 or 5 meters piece, between 4.5 and 5 meters piece. It came very, very close to the cage, and it happened many times. So you cannot actually touch them, but it's forbidden for safety reasons. And also in general, even when you take any scuba diving license, the first thing they are going to teach you, don't touch wild animals. It's also for respect, you know. And it's better we don't get the animals, wild animals, too used with human interaction, because later something may happen that is not good for animals. And you see that filming them, taking photos of them, sometimes is very easy, sometimes it's not that easy, because every single shark has his own personality. This one in the cage is my friend Andy Delios, that very good in filming the shark with the GoPro. Beautiful footages, very good close-up of the animals. Sometimes may be very easy, sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's very bumpy, sometimes the water is more turbid. When there are big waves, you have a lot of bubbles. Sometimes we have plenty of fish. Sometimes for some reason there is almost no fish, you know, but most of the time you have plenty of fish. So when you have the opportunity, the chance to take a picture like that, only a shark and the blue, that's a very beautiful chance. Sometimes you see them swimming like that together, and that's a good thing about Australia. In South Africa, when we go underwater and we observe the shark, even if sometimes we have like 3 sharks at the same time around the boat, most of the time you are going to see only one of them. Why? Because the visibility is very short. So in False Bay in South Africa we have average visibility of 5 meters. And it's good because the shark, when it comes around the cage, you are going to see them all the time. But for example in Gans Bay in South Africa, the average visibility is like 2 meters. Many times it's 1 meter only. So maybe you have 3 great white sharks and you don't see even one. So in Australia, the fact that you have 15, 20, 25 meters visibility is precious, because you can see 2, 3 great whites sometimes at the same time, and also you can see their interactions. I love this individual because that's the biggest one I saw in my life. So it's now 10 years that I'm doing expeditions with great white sharks. I went to Guadeloupe once, and also I made over 30 in South Africa, or something like that, close to 30, and then several in Australia. What happened is that this one is the biggest I ever seen. It was 5.5, 5.4 meters, and that's called jumbo, because some sharks get a name, and jumbo is one of the biggest one that has ever been seen and filmed in the world. So maybe some of you saw deep blue in Guadeloupe. Deep blue may be 20 or 30 centimeters longer, so very, very close, but it's not 7 or 8 meters like many media were saying. So deep blue may be 5.7. Just deep blue is much older. We don't know how much, but we know that it's much older, and the girth, the diameter is much bigger, it's very fat. While jumbo, you can see, it's like a photo model, very beautiful. You know. And the fact that the jumbo at the time was probably pregnant, by the shape of the body, the shape of the sides, we thought this, talking with Andrew Fox, that probably she was pregnant at the time when we saw her. It was like 4 or 5 years ago. We don't even know if she's still alive. And you see that her body is all covered by these scars. These are called mating scars of love bites, because the male, in sharks in general, not only in great whites, is going to bite the female, usually gently, as an invitation to mate. So it's part of the courtship behavior. But sometimes, in some species, they also hold the female while they are mating. You see that is a female because there is no copulatory organ here. You will see copulatory organ in some male later. And all these are all mating scars, are all love bites. So you see, even this one is another female. You see, there is no copulatory organ, only the pelvic fins. The tail of the great white shark is very typical because the upper lobe and the lower lobe are different in size, so still asymmetric, but the size of the two lobes is more similar than in many other species of sharks. And in some individuals, the lower lobe is almost as long as the upper lobe. This is typical feature of a fast-swimming species, like the tuna, for example, or the swordfish, or the marlin. And another feature they have that is typical of the fast-swimming species is the fact they have a structure, this one, that's called the caudal keel. It's like the caudal peduncle, that is this part of the body. It's flattened and wide on the side, and this make easier to cut the water, so reduce friction. If you have a cylindrical caudal peduncle, then you have a shape like this. You have a bigger surface of water, bigger surface, so a bigger amount of water, bigger volume of water to move. That's tiring. But if you have the caudal peduncle shaped like this, because there is the caudal keel, clearly it's like a knife. You cut the water. So you see the shark swimming at a distance, and then you see the tail accelerating. They are very beautiful when they do that, and they point straight to the bait. On the snout of a great white shark, you can see these pores, these tiny holes. These are called the ampullae of Lorenzini. That's what we call electroreceptory organ. So they are able to pick up tiny electrical discharges in the water. The nervous system of humans, the nervous system of all animals, work on an electric base. So if the shark is very close to some organism, he will be able to pick up its presence. Not distant, but just a few centimeters close. For example, there is a ray hidden under the sand. If the shark is swimming close to the bottom, we'll be able to find it, so he can capture it. Another thing is that they are able to pick up the tiny electrical discharges that are created when you put a metallic object into the water. You see the caudal keel in this picture? It's quite clear. That's the caudal keel. So the shark will be able to pick up these tiny electrical discharges, and that's the reason why they tend to bite metallic objects. Maybe the cage, the boat propeller, or a camera. So they are going to bite these items not because they are stupid, but just because they feel it and they want to explore. They are curious animals. Why we need a bait? It doesn't look good in the picture, so this is the reason why in most pictures you don't see the bait. We don't want to have, usually, the bait in the picture because it doesn't look good. But in some pictures, it's good to include the bait. Why the great white shark is interested in the bait? Why do we use the bait? So let's say that in general, we need a bait. We also need a chum. You know, the chum is blood of fish, oil of fish, tiny pieces of fish. And there are operators using a lot of this just because they think that it's necessary. Actually, when you are working in an area where the great white sharks are present, you don't need much chum, just a small amount. And that works, you know. The shark will come, can smell it. And the reason why we need also a bait is because the shark is not going to stay if there is no bait. So we must use the bait. It's not like seeing the orcas like we do in Norway. They need to come to the surface to breathe. They are mammals. Orcas are dolphins, big dolphins. So we just need to wait, and they will come at surface. We don't need bait for the orcas. What happens is that the great white shark is not coming at the surface to breathe because it's a fish. So we use the gills. So you need the bait. Now, you see in the picture that the bait is small, and that's what we do. Most of the time, like in this picture, we use the gills of some fish, like tunas most of the time, because they like the tuna. But we don't want to feed the animals. So we need bait that is not going to satisfy the shark, you know? So it's still going to hunt the seals and the live tuna, you know? We don't want to change their predatory behavior. That's very important. And I like in Australia the fact that the government is checking the situation all the time, also basing their consideration on good research. So only 2 operators in Australia are allowed to use the bait and the chum. In South Africa, we have 3 operators in False Bay. We have about 10 operators in Gans Bay, and we have 1 operator in Mossel Bay. So these bring 14, the total. Too many, just too many. And many even in Guadeloupe and Mexico. In Australia, we have only 2 in the best place in the world to see great white sharks. That's very good. I like it. The fact is that the less the impact, the better for the animals. And there will be also, every month, Sunday, when they are not allowed to work. They are not allowed to use the bait or the chum. We are still allowed to go to the Neptune Islands, but the chances of seeing a great white without bait are tiny. So they do whatever is possible to be sure that they are not going to change the behavior of the shark. And this I like very much, because for me that's the most important situation, the most important thing. Not harming the animal, not changing their behavior. They must remain wild animals. This is the way we like them. We don't want to domesticate the animals, you know. Sometimes the great white shark will succeed to swallow the bait. Sometimes it happens. The crew is very good and is properly trained, so this is not going to happen all the time. But sometimes they will do it because they are very good in attacking by surprise, and they can attain speed of 50 kilometers per hour. So they are very fast animals. And sometimes they just swim deeper, they come up, and sometimes they can even jump underwater, like they're doing even in South Africa. In South Africa, it's just more common. They are going to jump. But for example, the last expedition in Australia, that was only a few days ago, from the 4th to the 8th of April, I was there, we had several jump out of the water, full breach out of the water. So it can happen even in Australia. So it's normal that sometimes they reach the bait and they can even swallow the bait. So another good reason to have a small bait with almost no meat and no fatty tissues attached, you know. There is also a new rule by the government, the Australian government, that say that if the shark is taking a bait, now you must stop 15 minutes. That may seem ridiculous, but it still makes some sense, because if the shark is going to take 4 baits in a day, you lose 1 hour of activity. That's a lot. Because just think that many times you are waiting for the shark. The sharks are not going to stay all the time around the boat in the cage. Most of them don't care about the bait. Most of the great white sharks don't care about the bait, you know? So this bait we use is going to work for some of them. Some others we just pass by, I don't care, you know? Many times, the great white sharks, that's again jumbo, you see how beautiful she is. And that's the thing. And then you have some sharks that want to play, like your dog. They really want to play, some of them. You see that they are really not angry. They come just to play. And sometimes they are very attracted by the GoPro. This one tried to swallow the GoPro. Was going straight to the bait, and then just turned at the last moment. And clearly the person took the GoPro inside the cage, and the shark was biting the cage. That's one of the very few times that I saw a great white biting the cage. Why? I did so many expeditions, and I'm telling you that I saw very few times the shark biting the cage. Why? Why in the documentaries you see the shark biting the cage all the time? Because the people may force the shark to do that. Like, for example, by keeping the bait too close to the cage. That's not good. Just to give the people an impression that they want to swallow the person in the cage. It's not true. They don't want to do that. Most of the time, they don't care at all about the cage and the divers. We'd like they care more, so they come closer. But most of the time, you are seeing these kind of things, this kind of situation in the documentaries. You just see maybe the bait just because they cut, you know, the video, the footages. And they edit and they produce whatever they want. And then they give once again the impression that the shark is very interested in killing animals, the man-eater. It's not like that. Then, of course, you may have one shark that is interested to look at the divers. You may have very rare case of a great white shark that really want just to put the snout inside the cage. But that's a very weird situation. Almost never happen. In the documentaries, they provoke the shark to get too close to the cage by keeping the bait too close to the bars of the cage. That's not good. That's the lateral line. Like in most fishes, there is the lateral line. So they can feel the vibrations in the water. Vibration that may be in form of noise, or maybe just a wave of movement by a fish, by a diver, by a boat. So that's very important to understand the currents, the waves, the presence of potential prey. And the great white shark is impressive when it's biting because you see that the upper jaw can move forward. That's the upper jaw protrusion. So the upper jaw is not tightly attached to the rest of the cranium, to the rest of the skull. So it can come forward. This gives a bite that is very powerful. And the teeth that are big, triangular in shape, strongly serrated margin, are bent inside. So the shark is going to do like that with the upper jaw. Grab the prey. And very quick, because in 1 second or less than 1 second, the upper jaw will come back at its normal place. So, many sharks come to take the bait, many sharks come to play, many sharks don't care. They have a strong personality. Every single great white shark has a strong personality. Clearly, we hope to have a great white that want to play. But not always happen. Sometimes we have a very slow day. Maybe one shark is coming, maybe two, but maybe they go away immediately. And you try to work harder to make everything more interesting. Sometimes we try to do some noise to attract them. And many times they just don't care, they stay close to the bottom. You think there is no shark, but many times there are sharks, but they are on the bottom. That's the caudal killer. It's very evident. You see? It's like a structure for cutting the water, so reducing the friction. Typical of fast-swimming animals. Even the swordfish has this. Even the tunas has this. So not only species of sharks. And the conical snout, the wide gills. So you see that it's very easy to identify a great white shark. And sometimes you see them swimming together. This black patch at the apex of the pectoral fin is very typical of the species. You have black patches in many species of sharks, but in the great white as a specific shape. It's very important to look at the shape of this pattern of coloration. And also it's only present on the undersurface of the pectoral fin and not on the ventral surfaces. And you see the gills very big, very wide, because they need a lot of oxygen. They live a very intense life, so they need to burn a lot of glucose. They need a lot of sugar, and you know, for using the sugar to using the glucose, you need the oxygen. We do, they do, simply they don't have lungs. They breathe through the gills. So they need a lot of oxygen. So they can use a lot of glucose. They can jump out of the water up to 3 meters at least on the surface. They can run at 50 kilometers per hour, and they can also regulate their body temperature, because they are one of the very few species of sharks that is warm-blooded. They are not cold-blooded like most fishes. They have warm blood. And that's because of a specific modification of the circulatory system. They have what we call the rete mirabilis. I'm not going to bore you by explaining now the rete mirabilis, but just let's say that it is a system, is an anatomic system that make possible to have the body temperature that is higher than the surrounding water. So they can even explore tropical waters or very cold waters that have been found even in Alaska. They favor temperate cold waters. That's their favorite. But what happens is that actually they can move everywhere. It's one of the most cosmopolitan species in the world. That's again a female. That's Jumbo, you see? Very beautiful. And that's a beautiful male. These two copulatory organs are called claspers. The claspers are the intromittent organs, so they are used to impregnate the female. So they will be inserted inside the cloaca of the female. So that's the way it works. Let's say that that's another male, you see, the claspers. So these are the pelvic fins, 1 and 2. And these are the claspers. So they have two copulatory organs because they originate from the pelvic fins. Pelvic fins are paired, right and left, too. So it's normal that even the claspers are paired, right and left. And they get very big, very long in the mature male, and also very rigid, because they will be impregnated by calcium. You see, it's swallowing the bait, is succeeded to cut the rope, but you see it's almost nothing, just the gills of a tuna. That's again Jumbo. You can see that even you now may start to understand that's the same specimen, that's the same individual that I already saw. And that's the way it works. So the scars on the body of a shark are sometimes very useful to identify them. Most of the time, to identify a great white shark, we use the shape of the first dorsal fin. That's the first dorsal fin. This one. That's a tagged individual. You see that the posterior margin of the dorsal fin has a different shape in every single individual. It's like the fingerprint for humans. So we may just take a picture of the dorsal fin and we may create a catalog with all the sharks observed in that area, all the individuals. That's I like it because it's non-invasive, this method. And about the tagging, that's very important. Andrew Fox has tagged many great white sharks to study their movement, but what you always do is stay on the boat using a lens and just stick this tiny dart inside the skin of the shark. It's not going to use more invasive methods like those that sometimes you can see on the television, where there are people taking the shark out of the water, using drills and bolts on the body of the shark, harming badly the shark, and sometimes even killing the shark. I don't like invasive method of research. Research must be good for animals, or at least not creating any damage to the animals. Otherwise, what's the point? In every single journal, scientific journal, to publish reports of research, there is specified that the research must be done without harming the animals, without causing them sufferance, without causing them pain. So why harming a great white shark for a television show, presenting this as research? That's not research. That's just torturing the animals to make more money, you know? Sadly, this has been done. That has been done, is still done, and will be done even in future. And there is, sadly, there is no way to change the mind of some people, but clearly we can talk about this, so that people are more aware that even sometimes just watching a documentary television, you are contributing to harm the animals. Clearly, if nobody watched the things, we are going to stop, you know? So, tagging of sharks has been done in many different ways, and some way very good to study them, to study their movement in the water, even for years. And there have been a big program of tagging in USA, and still present nowadays, and they tagged many, many thousands of sharks without badly harming them. Still, of course, every kind of tagging is invasive, and we may also discuss if it still makes sense to tag the sharks. For me, and even for Andrew Fox, at this time, it's not useful anymore to tag the great white shark. Why? Tagging is useful if you have a migratory species, or if you know nothing about the movement of a species, and you want to explore, to understand where they go. In the beginning, tagging was like, okay, let's tag a few individuals, and then we may understand the movement of the species. Now, with the fact there are more sponsors, there is the television, all these kind of things, there is a pressure sometimes to tag all the individuals. That's crazy. It has no purpose, no logical reason to exist, this kind of thing. For the great white shark, we already know where they are. We already know where there are hotspots. We know where they reproduce. We know almost everything about their movement, and the most important thing we learned is that they are not really migratory species. They move, they are philopatric animals. That means they tend to congregate on specific spots in some periods for some reason. Usually will be for reproduction and for food. So we already know that. But they will go to these specific spots, like for example the Neptune Islands, from many different directions. So if you tag them, every different individual, you will just have a series of lines that makes no sense, are not useful at all. So we learned this after decades of tagging great white sharks. Now, what's the purpose of still tagging them? Maybe still interesting and maybe still useful for other species, but not for great whites, not now, not more. A great white shark like this, 5-meter great white shark, may have a mouth of that size. And when they bite, with the upper jaw protrusion, it happens that for a short moment the mouth becomes even wider. So sometimes you see that on the social media, on the documentaries, they will show you some shark bite on some fish, like a swordfish or a tuna. And sometimes it looks that has been produced by a huge shark. Most of the time, it looks like a single bite, but most of the time it's more than one bite. And many times you have to think that the great whites, when they bite with the upper jaw protrusion, they can produce a wider bite than their actual size of the mouth. And the other thing is that many, many times, most of the time, the shark is going to shake the head while he's biting. like that. So it's going to produce a bigger bite. You see, very difficult to understand the size of a great white shark from a bite. Most of the time it's like impossible, or you can have very rough estimates. That's one of the most interacting individual. You can see because he has this spot. That's a 4-meter great white shark, and she's very beautiful. She wants to interact all the time. She's very gentle, you know. Another interesting thing, that's the claspers. That's a beautiful close-up of the claspers. So there is a sort of hook that is located in the upper surface of the clasper that comes out like this when the shark wants to mate. Because when the clasper is inserted inside the female, this hook will keep the female still. So she's not able to escape if she wants, no? Very special animals. These weird things of nature, you know? And you see that many of them are really not interested in interacting, but others will be very interested in interacting with humans. There is another thing. So we have the surface cage. Everybody can use the surface cage. It's very easy. And it's called the surface cage because it stays at the surface all the time. That's very easy, and it's the type of cage it's used all over the world. You don't see well on this big screen, but this picture shows that the blue shark, the great white shark, has blue eyes, you know, not black as you can read in many books. He has blue eyes. That's again a jumbo. You see the mating scars. And that's a male. You see it's mature, so the claspers are very big. Great white sharks take a lot of time to reach sexual maturity. They have very long gestation, very, very long gestation, about 12 months. So let's say that for reaching sexual maturity, maybe from 8 to 12 years, but according to recent studies, sometimes maybe even much more than this. And also 12 months of gestation. So it takes a lot of time for a shark to reproduce, for the great white shark specifically, very long time. And also it's not like with bony fishes. It's not like with other fishes. They usually produce, depending by the species, but they may produce hundreds of even thousands of small fishes at once. The great white shark is like the average shark, will produce from 1 to 17 pups per liter. It's very small amount, 17, 1-7. It's very small amount when you think it's a fish, you know. The good thing is that the pups will be big, because a newborn great white may measure from 80 centimeters up to 1.5 meters. So it's a big animal. There is virtually no predator. There is actually only one predator that has been found for the great white shark, and that's the orca. But orcas in most parts in the world and in most situations just don't care about the great whites. They tend to avoid each other. There is the recent case of 2 orcas that started to kill great white sharks in South Africa, and ridiculously, they tend to say that, well, that's a problem, the great white shark will become extinct because of the orcas. That's nonsense. 2 orcas are not going to destroy the great white shark population in South Africa. The orcas there are much more interested in dolphins, usually. And then we have a couple of cases happening in California of orcas killing great whites, and only one case recorded in South Australia so far. So you see that it's very, very rare that orcas are going to kill great white sharks. But it makes sense. The average size of a great white shark is 3.5 meters. The average size of an orca is 7 meters, so you understand. And also orcas used to work in groups, so to attack in groups. So very easy to kill a great white shark. So for people that have a scuba diving certification, we also use what we call the bottom cage. These people are going in the bottom cage. The bottom cage goes down to the bottom, very slow, so we check that everyone is okay, there is no problem, but it looks quite claustrophobic, that usually you go down in the cage, you go on the bottom. maybe 15 meters, usually will be around 18 meters, and sometimes more than 20. Exceptionally, we may go to like 25 meters, but let's say usually will be around 18 meters. And it's the easiest dive you can imagine. It's not really claustrophobic, just you may think that before going in that kind of cage, but it's just taking a lift, like taking a lift. You just go down, you stay still, it's very easy. You don't even have to move or just compensate. And then you go on the bottom. Why it's beautiful? It's beautiful because there are stingrays, sometimes very, very big. There is very big stingrays sometimes that are also prey for great white sharks. And we have great white sharks. Great white sharks used to stay on the bottom most of the time. So if you go on the bottom, you don't even use a proper bait. You just keep some fish in the cage. And we move it so there will be some chum going around. And the shark usually come on the cage. They just explore. Sometimes just turn around the cage over and over and over. They're so close you may touch them, but I told you it's not something that you are going to do. You don't touch the shark, you don't stick the hands or the feet out of the cage. It's just not a good idea. But the shark, come very, very close many, many times. And it's extremely beautiful to see them swimming close to the bottom. The last expedition we had this April, only a few days ago, it was possible to see up to 5 great white sharks on a single dive in a cage. We stay on the bottom about half an hour. And sometimes they come so close. It's very dangerous anyway to put the hands or the arms out of the cage. In this case, thank you for coming. In this case, the shark came so close to the cage and to my camera. So I got excited. I want to go closer, And then I feel that something is touching my arm. So there was another shark, another great white, coming very close to the cage on the side. They are masters in coming close without being noticed. So it's very bad idea to put the hands and the arm out of the cage. I always check, but that time I just checked not enough, Like a blind spot, turn more your head is coming, That's the point. But sometimes they just swim over your head. They are so incredibly beautiful, And that's Andrew Fox. Andrew Fox sometimes go partially out of the cage, sometimes almost completely out of the cage, but always keeping part of his body inside. It looks that he's outside, but actually he's still inside with half of the body. The fact is that many sharks there know Andrew, and they behave in a very gentle way with him. Sometimes it's like there are dogs coming to take a picture so that he can take a picture of them. It's just unbelievable to see how gentle are the great white shark with this person, and the kind of relationship that he has built in so many years of activity. Is not trying to domesticate the wild animals. It's just that the shark gets used to his presence. That's it. Nothing else. And sometimes we had so many of these fish that are silver trevallies. They are big like that. And they are beautiful, but sometimes they are just too numerous, You see mating scars even on this shark. This may be actually more than mating sharks. You see even very close to, on the head, very close even to the eyes. This may be scars produced by some kind of agonistic behavior. Sometimes they may fight, Most of the time they really don't have to fight because they have a hierarchy that is built on the sides. So the biggest one feed, the smallest one will wait. A small shark is feeding, another bigger is coming, the small one will leave, so the bigger one may feed. There was a recent case observed a few years ago at the Neptunes where a great white shark bit another great white shark, and this was reported by the media like, oh, look, they attack each other, these ferocious animals. Not true. Simply what happened is that the eyewitness explained me. The person who took the picture explained what happened. The smallest one was a young that was not respecting the rules. So tended to go over and over and over on the bait and not caring of the fact that the bigger one was there, you know. So the bigger one got increasingly nervous and at the end just punished it. But he didn't give a proper bait, just with the tip of the teeth. So leaving small puncture on the head of the other one, but without harming it. You see the whole story is very different from what it looks from a single picture. That's you see the amount of silver trevallies. There are so many, makes sense. Many times, they will cover the approaching great whites. Sometimes that's what they do. It's like a symbiotic relationship. Because if you do that, then if a shark succeeds to take some food, then they may eat the scrap of food of the great white. Makes sense. Sometimes they will follow the shark and they will cover completely. And I finish by thanking all the people that joined my expeditions in these years, because there will be many students, university students, but also, let's say, common people, just people very, very interested about sharks and sharks. And maybe it's their dream to see great white, and they dream this for all their life, and then come on the expedition. There's so much enthusiasm, and also some researchers, some professional filmmakers, some documentarists, and several photographers. I want just to thank all these people because they made possible to do these expeditions. And on all the expeditions, Andrew Fox will collect the data, so it's also a very good way to improve the amount and the quality of the data. So thank you very much for you to come. And I want to finish by saying that if you have some question, I will be happy to answer.